For early access plus exclusive content, facilitated discussions, live one-on-one Q&As, and more, become a patron at patreon.com/BrucePointset. Okay, welcome back, everyone. This is Bruce Pointset, and this is the November feature interview for the newsletter. Today, I have with me Andrew DeVigal, who is the director of the University of Oregon's Agora Journalism Center in Portland, as well as the co-director of the school's Master's in Multimedia Journalism program and endowed chair in journalism, innovation, and civic engagement. So first off, how are you doing today, Andrew?
I'm good, Bruce. I'm so honored and pleased to be here. So thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, I think we first connected back at the experience engagement. It's what would you call that?
Yeah, that was an experience,
conference,
what we would say a unconference, right? Where we actually let the people who attended the conference to actually design their own sessions and figure out what they want to talk about, as opposed to, other people determining what that might look like. So let's elevate the intelligence of the crowd, and that's why we ended up calling it an unconference. But yeah, I remember that that conference, unconference specifically, and was thrilled to have met you there and engaged with you from that point on.
Yeah, and a conference was very, just the discussions we had, and just meeting some of the different, whether it's like local, media personalities and different kind of stakeholders there. I think it's been very influential just on, because that was back in, I want to say 2014, 2015, had to be somewhere around there.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, in terms of just shaping just how we move forward and how we look at this new media wave, if you will. That was very just very influential. And it's part of the reason I wanted to talk with you today, because when we look at where media is going, there's just a lot of factors going on that I think a lot of people, like if you're not, a part of a journalism school, if you're not a news junkie, if you're just outside of this world on an everyday level, a lot of people, are missing what's happening. But it's also, you can't escape. The other side of it is that you can't escape the effects of it. Like, media shapes all of our lives, so it's an important discussion to have. But we're gonna get a little bit more into the media nerd stuff in a second. Before that, though, I want to just kind of give people a little bit more idea of, one, who you are, as well as just the work that's happening at the Agora Journalism Center. So can you just first talk about what Agora is and what you all do?
Sure. Yeah. So the Agora Journalism Center, which is a part of the School of Journalism and Communication, is really focused on being the forum for the future of local news and civic engagement. So in particular, what we're interested in developing and producing is the fact that, we have this foundational belief that the health of democracy and journalism are linked, right? They're connected. So, and as we've seen from where journalism sits today and stands today, there's a lot of mistrust of the media and of journalism. And one of our beliefs to help actually build or re-earn that trust of communities is actually to start with community needs first. Let's ask, what do you guys talk about when you guys are gathered in your dining table? What are the issues that you most care about, right? Let's ask communities, as opposed to, the traditional journalists or editors in the newsroom determining what the news is about. Let's ask community members and communities what news should be about, and what we should cover, and what questions that we should address with communities rather than just simply for communities. So it's what we're calling community-centered journalism, right? is to really authentically start with community first, and let's address those community or those information needs, so that we're actually producing journalism with communities that actually addresses the issues that they're concerned with.
And that, you operate in an interesting space there when you talk about community-centered journalism, because theoretically, you would think journalism should be by nature community-centered, or at least who you're covering should be community-centered. But when you talk about how the sausage is made, like how are reporters and editors determining what they cover? It's usually from, who's giving us, press releases or orders from up top from either the publisher or more than likely an advertiser to the publisher of, there's certain stories to cover, there's certain things to, I guess, cover is not even the right word, but do,
Right.
Fluff pieces, PR pieces, and those have their place. But it's, again, this interesting space where there's a lot of distrust for media, and in a lot of cases it's earned. But the problem, again, is that media, like, I think people don't understand the function where that distrust and that, animosity towards media takes over an understanding collectively of why this is important. So, you get that cliche of throwing out the baby with the bathwater, but in a lot of cases, that feels like where we're at right now. And, doing this work as far as going back to the community, I think, or going back to the community is very important in terms of, I guess, reframing, one, how we engage with media and how media engages with the people, and building this ecosystem. But then also it's just, just again, rectifying a lot of damage done.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, no, and I appreciate you bringing up the word ecosystem, because I think that's where it sits, right? If we were to are able to create a media ecosystem of those providing trusted news and even just trusted information, like information providers back into the community, it would make a healthy information ecosystem for all, right? That can really benefit from all. So I really, again, the ecosystem term is could be confusing, or it could mean different things for different folks. But I think there's something in that word about creating a storytelling network, if you will, that actually does support the information health of a community. So, and the ecosystem also talks about a relationship, right? And that's the other area that we really want to lead into, is how do you develop those deeper sort of relational engagement work, those relationships that we're building, that's cyclical, that's reciprocal, so that it actually does support, again, for the benefit of community. So and just as much as you were alluding to that, perhaps the communities and people, it would behoove them to be more media literate, right, to help and understand what it takes to produce stories in a journalistic way. Journalists also need to also be more transparent in that process, so that people do understand the complexity of producing a story, right? Of reporting with a community, or with fact checking, and to verify the editing process. So all of those sort of media literacy is a two-way relationship. Journalists can be better at being more transparent in that process, just as much as community members also can take that extra effort to actually understand, how the sausage is made, as you were saying, but also, what are the key elements, like the understanding that we generally don't produce a story unless we have at least two sources that support that story, right? So how does that look like, and how do we convey that much more elegantly? And so in addition to the media literacy from the journalism, from the community side, journalists can also not just be more transparent, but they can also be more community literate, right? How do we understand values of listening better to community members so that we better understand what the needs are, but also how do we provide the information that people are asking for. So it's again building that relationship with communities rather than the traditional sources that people tend to, right? People that journalists tend to go to, which is elected officials or the police chief or the easier pathways. And how do we improve on that? So again, that goes back to, even though community-centered work is seemingly new, but as you pointed out, it's sort of the basics, right? And in fact, I teach a class in engaged journalism, and I have a subtitle to that class, and it's called, bringing the beat back. In this idea that it's bringing back the notion of beat journalism, where you're actually going back to the community, building that relationship so that you know who the community members are. And in fact, it'd be better if they were part of the community. Again, hence the challenge of newsrooms having that diversity problem, right? Because we don't have newsrooms that truly represent the communities we cover. It's very often unslanted, and so journalism also needs to do that better, is to actually recruit, retain, and really foster a relationship so that their newsrooms is truly representative of the communities in our coverage area.
Absolutely. And there's a few things I want to unpack there.
A lot to unpack.
No worries. But just when you talk about the idea that it's going back to basics, I'll take it a step further. If you look at who is successful now, whether on a local level or, on the national, international level, some examples good, some examples not so good, but they do use that model where they are part of the community. I remember, again, I'll use the more horrifying example, but it's real. I remember someone talking about, I forget what channel it was I was watching talking about this, but just why Fox News has become, not why it's become such a success, but one of the things that's fueling its success right now is that these talking heads, these Tucker Carlsons, these Sean Hannitys serve as more than just, yes, they are ripping, white supremacist talking points straight from the forum and, mildly sanitizing them so that you can put them on TV. That's a big appeal. But they also serve as, for lack of better terms, they do bring a community feel, I guess, to that community. Like they serve, people are getting, they feel like Sean Hannity is a part of their community, even though he's this talking, this wealthy radio host who just, gives them talking points to throw them in front of the bus. But again, he's giving them all this different, just these different things serving their community needs on the media. And Fox News has this thing where it's trying to serve, in a way where it's become the church for people who believe a lot of that stuff. And again, it's the effect of it and how we're seeing it, playing out in terms of society and mobilizing and, weaponizing a lot of just ugly hatred, bigotry, and again, organized, mobilized bigotry. It's awful, but I think that's something important to understanding, the nuts and bolts of how it's working beyond just here are the things they're saying. But to take a more positive example, when you look at local news, when I've talked with people, some of the things that they remember about their local papers or why they read them are not even necessarily the stories, but it could be. I remember I was talking with Lisa Loving for an interview, and she was talking about just checking for the school lunch menu, and I remember checking for bus schedules, weather, some of these daily things, or even stories that are not necessarily gonna be big exposés or drum up a bunch of readers, but profiling students who the academic performers of the week, or the student athletes of the week, and being able to just check for things like that. Again, small things, but it's all part of, again, creating this ecosystem and serving these bigger needs. And I think oftentimes, especially when we're trying to work on civic engagement, we're trying to work on exploring more progressive ideas in society, it's easy to get caught up in just the base, just that content alone, and it's the overwhelming obstacles we're going against. So, but
Right.
it's important to bring it back to, again, community. I love that word community when it comes to this, because it's the center of it all.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And again, what you just said, what came up for me, what you just said was that there is that distinction, right? So the local news, it is trying to satisfy, and it's first asking, well, how can we help, right? What are your information needs? What are you seeking for? What do you hope for us to gather and to report on, right? So that's one perspective. And in contrast, as you pointed out, right, with all the talking heads and in the opinion, right, the opinion section of these sort of 24-hour news channels. And I don't want to necessarily just pick on Fox, right? CNN on the other side, in their opinions, in their sort of talking head opinion, it's also just trying to elevate contentious emotional reaction than actually trying to elevate useful participatory knowledge that allows people to, again, be active in their community, right? So there's a strong distinction between the two. So the more we can think local, the more we can think about addressing information needs, and the more that we can kind of build community around healthy information and trusted information that supports the community to thrive. I think that's where the direction that we need to go towards, so that it actually does generate news and information that's useful, that's abundant, that it's also perhaps even produced in conjunction with or without journalists. And what I mean by that is, the opportunity to share what's in your lunch for today or this week, or who's winning the local high school sports. And all of that can be and should be provided by all people who care about that issue, right? So what I'm thinking about and describing is a collaborative approach to filling those information gaps with journalists and non-journalists, aka community members who care, alike. So a good example of what's happening in that sense is it's happening in Chicago. It's an organization called the City Bureau, and they have a program called the Documenters Program, where they actually recruit, they train, and they pay everyday community members to document citywide meetings, so that they report on it, they record it, and they put it up on a cloud so that anybody in the community can access it, right? So it's not done by journalists, but it's also citywide meetings, or the first meetings that journalists are then not able to attend because we haven't even talked about the economic challenges that journalism is going through. But that's one of the reasons why they end up going to these, the elected officials or the police chief, is because those are known contacts, and it's easier for them to do their work because of their known contacts. So the last thing that they're going to be able to do, because they have to write 3 stories, share it on Twitter, on Facebook, right? By the end of the day, they're going to be exhausted, just like regular human beings, that they're not going to be going to like the school board meetings, if you will, or the city council meetings. So in Chicago, one of the reasons why they developed the Documenters Program is to really, again, support those information needs by providing those information details from these meetings, reported on from everyday people that have been trained and, again, equipped to actually document these meetings and again, share them. So interesting model that's happening out there in Chicago, and I know they're expanding the Documenters Program and across other cities in the U.S.
And so I love that example because it gets to the heart of the issues you talked about with economics, because we're, as someone who does journalism and creative nonfiction teaching, I found that there's, despite the fact that a lot of, traditional journalism departments or, editorial departments are slimming down and a lot of local media is slimming down, there is the demand for journalism skills and learning media related skills isn't going anywhere. And a lot of people, one, are taking these skills either for, again, PR, advertising, even in like social justice and like the nonprofit space. There's, again, there's no shortage of need for these skills. However, when it comes to traditional journalism and just the need to cover things like school boards, like, development commissions, you're just the plethora of very important things happening in your local government, there isn't a lot of resources for that. And when you're trying to sell, if you're trying to sell covering that to a publisher when you're not doing it already, knowing that, this is not the type of information that these stories don't generally go viral unless, it's some person screaming about vaccine conspiracies at the school board meeting, then you're in a bind. Yet it's essential information. So I love that example where they're paying people to do it, because that's what it comes down to. You have to treat this with the importance it is and not have, if you're leaving it up to, well, what's going to get views and what's going to, satisfy the lowest common denominator, of course, just the regular news at your school board meeting is not going to get that. Does that make the information less important? Of course not. That's ridiculous.
Exactly.
So again, it comes down to the economics of this. And that's really, when we talk about where journalism is going, I think about all those days when I was in the newsroom, how much time I spent, refreshing the stat counter on all these different stories and seeing, okay, I get why certain people are angling for, do this lowest common denominator story, or do, this salacious, again, just celebrity type piece, because despite what people, because everyone will tell you, you should be covering this, you should be covering this, you should be covering this, positive, important thing in the community. But if I'm being a cynical former reporter, or cynical on and off reporter, I guess, people don't read that. A lot of people say they want to see these things, but they don't actually read it. They don't actually watch those stories. It's not what's driving their engagement. And that's human. I get it. There's a lot of things competing for our attention. There's a lot of things out there, but it's tough. So either, if we understand when these things are important, again, it's a matter of actually investing in it. And, but of course, that kind of gets to the issue is, where does one find funding? Where, and I want to ask you, as far as, working, because it's not like, the University of Oregon is not exactly a small brand by any means, but yet you're swimming in the same world with everyone else competing for funding in this time, competing for resources. So can you just talk about, I guess, just some of the realities and obstacles in, investing in innovation that if you just go and pitch it to people, they'll be like, yeah, this makes sense.
Right. Yeah, no. And I think, just to put in a bit more context, right? I mean, as you alluded to, the demise of local journalism is prevalent, right? you mentioned news deserts, and again, those are the areas of cities and rural communities and towns where there's just no local news source. Nobody's getting informed. A lot of their news is coming from national television, right? And we've known how disastrous that could be. And we also know that when local journalism or local, if journalism doesn't cover the local news, corruption happens, right? Nobody's watching the purses of city council people, because now they can act at their own will, mainly because nobody's watching, right? So it's a great case study of a community, of a town called Bell in Los Angeles a few years ago, where that was underreported, and sure enough, city council people were giving themselves raises and nobody was watching. Next thing you know, they're like, the city manager was making $800,000 while they're one of the poorest counties in Los Angeles area. And that didn't break until the Los Angeles Times came in there, investigated what was happening, and revealed the lack of coverage and the lack of attention that people were giving towards city council. So again, an example of why local journalism is so important and why it needs to be sustained. Now, going back to this area of, how do we sustain this? What is the revenue model for sustaining local journalism? I always think about that, the one line that Dave Chappelle had whenever he had that Wu-Tang Clan skit, when they're like, you just got to diversify your bonds, right? And that's the whole idea, is how do you diversify your income stream? So traditionally, it's all been advertising, right? And that's where, and when the news industry was flush, it's because advertising was great. There was a great margins of people getting, of advertisers getting eyeballs onto their ads, mainly because new people were reading it, right? People were subscribing to the local news. So of course, with the quality going down in some instances, or the fact that advertising has been lost because of the digital domain, some people would point to, for example, Craigslist, right, as one of the reasons why advertisers are no longer advertising in news organizations. I think it's one element, but I think it's very complicated to just rely on one reason why the challenges has been there. We've talked a little bit about the lack of trust, right? All of that adds to this challenge of an industry that is suffering economically. So the question in my mind is, is it time to stop thinking about the measure of success for news organizations based on subscription, or even on number of page views, on time spent on a page? I mean, all of those are very transactional, and it also doesn't really actually mean much to the communities that we're serving, right? What it should really be is measuring the success of how trustworthy a news organization is, as opposed to how many clicks that they get to a story. So how do we get there, right? How do we build and re-earn that trust? And also looking at the sustainability model. Again, looking at addressing the information needs of community can actually be one portion of building that trust. But also in this notion of diversifying your income streams, I think advertising can remain a small portion of it. I think I talked a little bit about membership. So the more that you can build out a membership plan so that people are investing directly by small contributions, just like what public media does, is those pledge drives, more of that could happen in terms of membership, right? So membership also has an opportunity to become a pathway for more people from the community to participate in that process of generating journalism and generating news and information that people can use. So again, there's a membership model that's interesting. In fact, there's a organization called the Membership Puzzle that has been really looking into how do we build a membership around the communities that we're serving, so that not only are we learning, but they are needing for that information health, but also becomes a one-on-one relationship with community members and the news organization, right? So those are two things. Again, advertising and membership. And then the third arm that I would look into is public funding, right? It's not anything new, right? We have OPB in town, but also behind that is National Public Radio. Behind that is all public funding from a federal perspective to actually support that kind of information ecosystem. So there's nothing new, but there's something a little bit more expansive. So for example, a part of that whole President Biden's Bring Back Better legislation, and that's on in the docket right now. A part of that funding is actually looking at a $13 million infusion of cash over 5 years that actually would support 113 newsrooms in Oregon, right? So if you think about like the tax credit that publishers and stations can really lean on and actually support and pay for local journalism, more particularly a local reporter to cover that community, that is one other solution, is again getting public funding. Of course, that becomes layered, right? Like who decides which organization gets paid, gets that public funding, right? It can't be news organizations determining that, because we're going to go back to the way it's been done in the past, as opposed to evolving journalism so that it actually authentically supports and serves communities. So one model about looking at how to distribute and use public funding is happening in New Jersey, in fact. So there's an initiative in New Jersey that was initially pushed over by an organization called Free Press, but in 2018 they created a Civic Information Consortium, which is a first of its kind nonprofit with the mission of strengthening local news coverage and also boosting civic engagement in the communities across their state in New Jersey. So it's pretty amazing. It's the consortium's made up of both media, higher education institutions, the technology sector, and more importantly, with community groups, right? They help determine how do you distribute those funds. It's not perfect, but I think there's a model that we can lift from. And in New Jersey, they're actually looking at it from a rather than federal funding, they're actually looking at it from a statewide funding source and taxes that comes out from New Jersey. Yeah, so exciting opportunities, exciting models. I don't think it's going to be the panacea for what ails journalism and local media, but I do think that there's a way to diversify your income streams to be able to support local journalism and hopefully close down some of these news desert that is popping up across our nation.
It's interesting when you talk about, especially the idea of public funding, how this doesn't get framed more often as, a jobs creating program. I remember that, especially during the 2012 election, just hearing job creators, and this idea that we have to, subsidize the job creators. Well, if you're talking about a program, especially filling the hole in news deserts and filling the need for public information, maybe I'm an optimist. Obviously, I'm in the media industry, so I have a bit of a bias here, but I think it's the same way we look at cleaning up trash, the same way we look at other public needs. Information is a public need. Understanding, what's happening at the Development Commission, having some reporting on that, having reporting on the school board, having reporting on the city council, having reporting on the historic sites committee, et cetera, et cetera. It's just a part of the health of your community. Having that information out there and available is a part of the health of your community.
Yeah.
And it comes with an added benefit of, if someone is covering it, you have to pay someone to cover that. You have to pay people to do that work. So again, you're also providing an investment in jobs and investment in people's welfare, and creating, again, more of a feeling of that ecosystem where the news and the community are a part of each other. So it seems, again, I'm an optimist, I'm in the media, I have a bias here, but it just seems like common sense. Yeah. Yet, of course, obviously the politics of that say different. And as you kind of pointed out with the media deserts, there's a lot of national interests who have, again, a vested interest in keeping it that way.
Mhm.
You know, I remember when Rush Limbaugh died, people were talking about, you know, his strategy of going to all these places where, you know, that have either become media deserts or were media deserts, and, you know, finding those voices with, again, the white supremacist talking points and everything, but just staking his ground there. And it's obviously it's worked very well, but that I don't think that has to be necessarily a one-way thing, or is necessarily just a, you know, conservative white supremacist media thing. I think there is a lot of, we talk about the topsy-turviness of the industry right now, and to be clear, I think it's going to get uglier before it gets better.
Mhm.
I would like to believe different, but nothing I'm seeing tells me any different. That said, I do see a lot of opportunity here, a lot of opportunity, you know, like you talked about, in creating that ecosystem and creating that engagement where the community and the news are, or the news media are one, not one and the same, but where that news media is part of the community. There's opportunities for that. There's so much, again, demand for journalism skills that I don't know why we can't add in media literacy in that. I don't know why, in a, when we, people need so many, you know, just community organizations are, again, looking for people with media skills to just, whether it's do their social media, whether it's run their, you know, write their newsletters, et cetera, write press releases. If there's all this need and people will invest in the education, there's got to be a way to tie in some more, you know, specifically civic engagement minded practices, some more, you know, media literacy education into that. It's a little bit of a uphill battle, but
Yeah.
I don't think, at least at this time, I remember having this conversation with someone else about how the lack of media literacy, you know, it's almost putting us on this ticking, you know, this countdown where can we, like, as a society, continue to deal with the effects of the lack of media literacy.
Mm.
And, you know, I guess we'll see. That's a very, it's a
Yeah.
dark way to frame it, but
Yeah, and I think in addition to the media literacy, I also think, again, the purpose of media, at least in my mind, at least journalism, is to really, again, make sure that people have the information they need to actually thrive in their community, right? To participate in their governments, civically, right? To be able to, you know, uh, you know, support their family and their neighbors to thrive. I mean, that's what good, healthy information should provide, so that they actually know how to participate in said community. And so, I think it's both media and civic literacy, right? How do we operate in a society together? I mean, we sometimes forget how to do that. And, you know, of course, the pandemic didn't help. Facebook doesn't help, right? Because we're not seeing each other in real life, right? We're not bumping into people. So it's just, it's so uh, complicated, right? It's complex. And it's all interwoven and integrated with each other. So, you know, another model, and it's interesting you mentioned about, again, supporting each other. And another model that's of interest is WHYY in Philadelphia has this new project. They call the acronym is NICE, but it stands for News and Information Community Exchange. And the way they describe it is that it's a network of grassroots content creators working together, like in a form of a mutual aid, right? So that they're collaborating. And in fact, they call it a journalism collective, is because they're you know, it's a it's a way to serve their communities by sharing content, sharing resources and sources, and even wisdom and audiences with each other, right? As a collective. And some of them, they're not all journalists that make up this space, right? They could be just grassroots news and information content creators, right? They could be made up of both journalists, also community organizations that provide information back to the community, right? Or it could be translators who are translating one set information to the other, or it could even be, social media influencers, right? We've seen plenty of folks who are really kind of standing up and sharing the mic, if you will, because of their influence on social media or on social media platforms. So this ecosystem, we talked about that ecosystem earlier. What excites me is what's possible if we all find value. And of course, we have to have a shared value, right? We all need to say, yes, we're doing this together because we really want our communities to thrive. Communities, plural, not just one, but recognizing that we live in a intercultural, interracial community. So, as long as we agree on that premise that this is the kind of world that we want to design and live in, then this collaborative can really happen to actually support that information health of our area.
Right.
I'm starting to sound like I'm very like a broken record at this point. I keep finding myself repeating the same words because I just feel like it's so important, right? Language is important. This is what we mean. This is our intentionality. Mm-hmm. So unless we have that shared mission, that shared vision of the world that we want to live in, then we don't need to play with others who might disagree, right? When we're talking about the white supremacy, it's like, well, they don't envision the world that we're envisioning. So I'd rather collaborate and work with people who have the same vision.
Right. So on that note, I want to just thank you, Andrew, for taking the time to. I know it kind of feels like, again, we're kind of saying the same things, but I do think it's important to have these conversations and to, nothing else, really just put this stuff out into the world out loud. So I want to just thank you again for taking the time to do that. And for people who are, want to learn more about the Agora Journalism Center or, get involved or support the work you're doing, where can they go? And also, do you have any, exciting events coming up that you'd like people to know about?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Bruce. So yeah, if people are hungry to learn more about our work at the Agora Journalism Center, again, it's part of the University of Oregon School of Journalism and Communications. So you can go to Agora, agora.uoregon.edu. So that's our main website. From that website, you can learn more about our vision, and also some of the research and also some of the projects that we're facilitating to really, again, bolster the information health of our local communities. The one project that I'm excited by, and it's still much information mode at this point, but it is to try to bring together those who care about Portland and its future. We ran this initiative a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic, and it was called the Doers Gathering, where we brought people who are doing things to address the housing challenges that our community is facing. And we did that 2 years ago. I thought it was very successful. That could be also one of the projects that you can look into when you visit the Agora website. But what we're hoping to do early next year is also do another Doers Gathering, but focusing on community organizations or even individuals that are actually actively thinking about what the future of Portland might look like, right? And the way we want to design it. So we want to amplify those initiatives, those projects, and also bring people together so that people who do have resources, either in finance or time or network, we want to bring people who also care about the same thing together to help support each other and be aware of the various initiatives that I think some excellent organizations in town are actually doing to envision a better Portland.
Wonderful. Well, Andrew, thank you again and enjoy the rest of your day.
I appreciate this time, Bruce. Take care now. And thanks for doing this work.
Thank you for watching. Please like and share and subscribe so you can stay up to date on all the latest videos. Thank you.